1964, a heavy-hitting professional boxer swaggered into a sweaty Oakland gym, looked 140-pound martial artist in the eye, and sneered, "Show me something real." What happened next didn't just end a career. It shattered everything the boxing world thought they knew about human biomechanics and raw power. The year was 1964, a period of massive cultural tectonic shifts in America, and the martial arts world was no exception. Following the Long Beach International Karate Championships, the name Bruce Lee had begun to ripple through the combat sports community. To some, he was a revolutionary, a man stripping away the archaic, rigid traditions of classical fighting. To others, especially the gritty blood and spit purists of the Western boxing gyms, he was a Hollywood novelty and actor performing choreographed dances disguised as combat. Zion Callahan belonged firmly to the latter camp. Zion was a 215-pound heavyweight contender with an 18-2 professional record. He was built like a mid-century locomotive, with shoulders so broad they seemed to eclipse the fluorescent lighting of the gyms he haunted. His nose had been broken 3 times, giving his face a permanent, rugged asymmetry. Zion fought out of a tough, no-nonsense stable in Philadelphia, but had recently relocated to California to secure bouts against the West Coast heavyweights. He was a man who understood violence as a currency. To him, power was generated through the floor, driven by mass, and delivered with bone-crushing intent. One humid Tuesday afternoon, Zion was sitting in a diner with his cornerman and manager, Mickey Doyle. Mickey was reading a local paper featuring a prominent spread on Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch kick demonstration at Ed Parker's tournament. Look at this," Mickey grunted, tossing the paper across the Formica table. "A $140 soaking wet, and they're writing about him like he's the second coming of Dempsey. Says here, he can knock a man back 6 feet with a punch that travels 1 inch. It's parlor tricks, Artie. Smoke and mirrors." Zion stared at the photograph of the lean, intense Chinese-American martial artist. A slow, cynical smile spread across his bruised face. "Nobody bends physics, Mickey. 140 pounds is 140 pounds. You want to generate force, you need mass and rotation. If this kid steps into a ring with a real fighter, he gets his head taken off." "Forget it, Artie," Mickey said, stirring his coffee. It's not in our lane." But the seed was planted. Zion was a proud man, deeply resentful of the media fawning over what he considered a flashy amateur. He wanted to expose the myth. He wanted to see the magic trick fail under the pressure of real, unadulterated violence. 2 days later, Zion and Mickey pushed open the heavy wooden doors of a modest Kune martial arts school in Oakland. The air inside was thick with the smell of canvas sweat and dit-da-jow liniment. The rhythmic thwack-thwack of pads echoing off the brick wall ceased almost immediately as the 2 large, imposing men stepped onto the floor. Bruce Lee was at the far end of the room, working with a senior student named Thomas. Bruce was in simple athletic trousers and a white undershirt, his lean musculature pulled taut like a coiled spring. He didn't look like a heavyweight contender. He looked like a greyhound. Zion didn't bother with pleasantries. He walked straight across the mat, his heavy leather shoes squeaking against the floorboards, violating the unspoken rules of the dojo. Mickey trailed behind, a smug expression plastered on his face. "Lee?" Zion's voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that commanded the room. Bruce turned, a towel draped over his neck. He assessed the situation instantly. He took in Zion's cauliflowered ear, the flattened bridge of his nose, and the heavy, calloused knuckles resting on his hips. Bruce's expression remained perfectly neutral, a placid lake hiding a volatile undertow. "I am," Bruce replied, his voice calm, polite, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. and you are interrupting a private class. Name's Zion Callahan. Professional heavyweight. I saw your little write-up in the paper, Zion said, gesturing dismissively. It's a 1-inch punch, the invisible kicks, all that mystical oriental garbage. Tophis, Roos's student, stepped forward, his face flushing with anger. Huh, you can't just walk in here. Bruce held up a single finger. Thomas immediately stopped and stepped back. I'm not here to start a street brawl, Zion continued, though his body language screamed the exact opposite. He crossed his massive arms. I'm a professional. But I'm sick of people disrespecting the fight game by pretending you can magically generate knockout power without mass. I've spent 10 years taking beatings to learn what real power is. So, I came here to ask you man to man. Show me something real. The room fell dead silent. The tension was suffocating. Mickey chuckled softly from the background, leaning against a wooden Wing Chun dummy. Bruce didn't blink. He slowly reached up and pulled a towel from his neck, folding it neatly and placing it on a nearby bench. He understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't just a challenge, it was a clash of paradigms. If he backed down, the myth that traditional martial artists were just dancers would be validated in the eyes of the Western boxing community. If he fought and lost, his entire philosophy, the emerging concepts of what would later become Jeet Kune would be discredited before it even fully bloomed. Mr. Callahan, Bruce said, his tone dangerously soft. The board does not hit back. A demonstration is just that, a demonstration of physical principles. It is not a fight. Boxing is a beautiful science. I have studied Dempsey, Hazlitt, and Louis. I respect your profession. Don't patronize me, Zion snapped, taking a half step forward. I don't want a lecture on physics. I want you to hit me. Or better yet, I want to see if you can stop me from hitting you. Bruce sighed. It was the sigh of a man who realized that words had reached the end of their usefulness. He looked at Mickey, then back at Zion. You are heavier than me by at least 70 pounds, Bruce noted. You punch for a living. If we spar and you get hurt, you will blame my methods as dirty. If I get hurt, you will say my methods are useless. There is no victory here. Assign a waiver right now, Zion mocked. Put some gloves on. Let's move around. Unless all that speed is just for the cameras. Wah! Drew slowly unbuttoned his cuffs. The polite host vanished. The martial artist stepped forward. May, Bruce said without breaking eye contact with the heavyweight. Clear the center of the floor and lock the front door. The setup was brutally simple. No ring ropes, no referee, no 3-minute rounds. Just an open expanse of hardwood floor and canvas. Zion laced up a pair of well-worn 12-ounce boxing gloves, cracking his knuckles inside the leather. He bounced on his toes, his massive frame radiating an intimidating, predatory energy. He looked completely relaxed, entirely confident in his physical superiority. Bruce, conversely, opted for a pair of light, open-fingered leather mitts, early prototypes of the grappling gloves used in modern mixed martial arts. He wanted the tactile sensation, the ability to trap and grab if necessary. He stood quietly in his corner, his feet shoulder-width apart, breathing deeply through his nose. He wasn't bouncing. He was grounding himself. Rules? Mickey asked, acting as the impromptu referee, holding his hand up in the center of the floor. No eye gouges, no throat strikes, no groin strikes, Bruce said flatly. Everything else is communication. Zion laughed loudly. Communication. I love it. Don't worry, kid. I'll go easy on the head. Mickey dropped his hand and stepped back. Go. The sparring session began. Zion immediately took the center, his guard high, his chin tucked behind his lead shoulder in a classic Philly shell. He stalked forward, throwing a heavy, probing left jab. Whoosh! It cut through the air where Bruce's head had been a fraction of a second before. Bruce had slipped to the outside with microscopic efficiency. He didn't leap away, he simply adjusted his vertical axis, just enough to let the leather graze his hair. Zion grunted in surprise, but immediately followed up with a thunderous right cross, pivoting on his back foot, putting all 1,515 pounds of his mass behind the blow. It was a punch designed to shatter jaws and end careers. Bruce didn't block it. Blocking a 215-pound man's cross with a 140-pound frame would have resulted in broken bones regardless of technique. Instead, Bruce utilized the principle of interception. As Zion's right shoulder initiated the movement, Bruce fired a lead straight righter fencing-inspired thrust straight down the center line. Because a straight line is faster than a curved one, Bruce's fist connected squarely with the bridge of Zion's nose a split second before Zion's massive cross could fully extend. Crack. The impact was sharp, a whip crack of kinetic energy. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it was incredibly disruptive. It snapped Zion's head back, throwing his alignment completely off balance. His devastating right cross sailed harmlessly over Bruce's shoulder. Zion stumbled back, blinking rapidly. A thin trickle of blood appeared at his nostril. He wiped it with the thumb of his glove, his eyes widening. The speed was incomprehensible. It wasn't just that Bruce moved fast, it was that Bruce seemed to start moving before Zion did. "No, okay," Zion growled, his pride stung. The smirk was entirely gone. "You're quick. Let's see how you handle the inside." Zion abandoned the long-range boxing and surged forward like a furious bear, looking to close the distance and smother the smaller man. He wanted to trap Bruce in the clinch, lean his massive weight on him, and batter his ribs with short, heavy hooks. This was the twist. This was the moment Bruce's classical Wing Chun training met the brutal reality of a modern, heavyweight professional fighter. Zion crashed into Bruce, absorbing a rapid flurry of straight punches to his chest and shoulders to get inside. The sheer mass of the boxer pushed Bruce backward. Zion grabbed the back of Bruce's neck with his left glove, locking him in a tight collar tie, and drove his right fist into Bruce's ribcage. Thud. Bruce gasped. The sheer force of the body blow vibrated through his entire torso. It felt like being hit with a sledgehammer wrapped in leather. If that punch had landed an inch lower, it would have cracked a floating rib. Zion smiled grimly. "Not so fast when I got hold of you, huh?" He pulled Bruce's head down, preparing to deliver a devastating uppercut. In that fraction of a second, a profound realization washed over Bruce Lee. His traditional trapping hands were highly effective at striking rain, but against the sheer crushing mass of a giant attempting to dirty box him from the clinch, classical stances were a death sentence. He couldn't trade force for force. He had to become water. He had to adapt instantly, or he was going to be seriously injured. As Zion loaded the uppercut, shifting his weight to his right side, Bruce completely collapsed his own resistance. Instead of trying to pull away from the collar tie, Bruce stepped deeply into Zion's space, crowding the punch. He dropped his center of gravity precipitously. With Zion's weight committed forward for the uppercut, Bruce snaked his left arm inside Zion's guard, bypassing the gloves entirely. He didn't aim for the head, he aimed for the structure. Bruce drove the heel of his palm directly into the nerve cluster at the hinge of Zion's jaw, while simultaneously using his right hand to trap Zion's left elbow, pulling it sharply across Zion's own centerline. It was a masterclass in leverage. By turning the heavyweight's massive head and twisting his shoulder, Bruce completely broke Zion's posture. The uppercut died before it even launched. Zion felt a sickening wrench in his neck and found himself suddenly spun off balance, his back turned slightly toward the smaller man. Before Zion could recover his footing, Bruce fired a devastatingly precise oblique kick-a-fast, stomping motion aimed right at the top of Zion's lead kneecap. Smack. Zion roared in pain as his leg buckled beneath him. The kick wasn't thrown with full destructive intent. Bruce pulled the power at the last millimeter to avoid permanently tearing the ACL, but it was enough to completely collapse Zion's base. The giant boxer went down to one knee, heavily panting, his gloved hands touching the canvas to keep from falling face first. The entire sequence, from the brutal clinch to the boxer kneeling on the floor, had taken less than 4 seconds. The gym was so quiet you could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Mickey stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the newspaper completely forgotten. Thomas watched in absolute awe, having just witnessed his master transcend the very art they practiced daily. Bruce didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He stepped back precisely 3 feet, returning to a neutral, relaxed stance. His ribs ached intensely from the single body shot he had absorbed, a stark reminder of the danger he was in. He looked down at the heavyweight champion. "You wanted to see something real," Bruce said quietly, his chest heaving slightly from the burst of adrenaline. "Mass and rotation are powerful, but timing beats speed and precision beats power. Do you wish to continue, Mr. Callahan?" Zion knelt on the canvas, staring at the sweat-stained floorboards. His knee throbbed, his nose bled, but more profoundly, his entire understanding of physical combat was currently dissolving. He had grabbed a man 70 pounds lighter than him, hit him clean, and yet he was the one on the floor, dismantled not by brute force, but by an architectural deconstruction of his own body mechanics. Slowly the boxer looked up. The anger was gone, replaced by something much rarer in the eyes of a prize fighter. It was absolute, unadulterated fear. Zion Callahan did not speak a single word on the drive back across the Bay Bridge. He sat in the passenger seat of Mickey's beat-up Cadillac, an ice pack pressed firmly against his swelling knee, his eyes fixed on the gray waters of the Pacific. Mickey, usually a fountain of loud opinions and profane complaints, was equally silent. The cigar in Mickey's mouth had gone out 20 minutes ago, but he kept chewing on the damp end, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The physical pain in Zion's knee was manageable. It was a dull throb, a bruised patella that would heal in a week. But the psychological trauma was a deeply embedded splinter, festering with every passing hour. He had been dismantled, not beaten in a brawl, not caught by a lucky haymaker, but systematically unspooled like a cheap sweater by a man who weighed 70 pounds less than him. The following Monday, Zion returned to the gritty confines of the Golden Globes gym in San Francisco. The air was thick with the familiar, comforting scent of canvas, stale sweat, and wintergreen rubbing alcohol. This was his sanctuary, the place where physics made sense, where bigger men hit harder and the strong survived. But as he began his shadowboxing routine, the mirror reflected a stranger. His movements, once fluid and imposing, were hesitant. Every time he threw his heavy right cross, a phantom memory hijacked his nervous system. He could feel the phantom sting of a perfectly timed straight right snapping his head back before his own punch could land. He could feel the terrifying sensation of his center of gravity being stolen from him in the clinch. "Snap it out, Artie. You're pushing the punches." Mickey barked from the apron, clapping his hands. "You look like you're fighting underwater. Turn the hips." Zion grunted, trying to force the power, but his timing was shattered. His confidence, the invisible armor every heavyweight relies upon to step into the ring, had been punctured. This deterioration became dangerously apparent 3 weeks later during an intense sparring session with a highly touted prospect named Raymond the Anvil Cobb. Raymond was a massive 230-pound brawler who fought exactly the way Zion used to, heavy pressure relying on chin and brute force. In the second round of sparring, Raymond crowded Zion against the ropes, initiating a tight clinch. He leaned his immense weight onto Zion's chest, freeing his right hand to dig brutal hooks into Zion's ribcage. Thud. Thud. The impact was bone-rattling. In the past, Zion would have gritted his teeth, planted his feet, and fired back with his own heavy artillery, willing to trade trauma for trauma. But in that suffocating clinch, Zion didn't see Raymond. He saw the dojo in Oakland. He remembered Bruce Lee collapsing his resistance, stepping into the pressure and bypassing the gloves entirely to attack the structure. Zion panicked. Instead of fighting his way out of the clinch using traditional boxing mechanics, he tried to mimic what Bruce had done. He dropped his weight and attempted a clumsy, unpracticed palm strike to Raymond's jawline while trying to trap his elbow. Because Zion had zero training in Wing Chun or Jeet Kune Do principles, the move was a catastrophic failure. He abandoned his guard, leaving his chin completely exposed. Raymond, confused but opportunistic, simply stepped back an inch and unleashed a devastating left hook. Crack. The punch caught Zion flush on the jaw. His legs turned to gelatin, and he crashed onto the canvas, the gymnasium light spinning violently above him. Mickey scrambled through the ropes, waving Raymond off. "That's it. We're done for the day." Mickey knelt beside his fighter, his face flushed with anger and concern. "What in God's name was that, Artie? You dropped your hands and tried to slap him. You're a heavyweight contender, not the street corner bouncer." Zion sat up slowly, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth. He looked up at Mickey, his eyes wide and haunted. "I couldn't stop him, Mickey," Zion whispered, the gravelly voice devoid of its usual bravado. "I tried to use the trick, the water trick, but I'm just a rock." Mickey sighed, running a hand over his bald head. "That martial arts kid broke you. Not your bones, Artie. He broke your head. We have a sanctioned bout against Dalton Briggs in 6 weeks. Dalton is a killer. If you step into the ring fighting ghosts, Dalton is going to end your career, and he might end your life." That night, Zion sat in his cramped apartment, staring at the wall. The fight against Dalton Briggs was a title eliminator. Dalton was a 220-pound wrecking ball, famous for an iron chin and a left hook that had ended the careers of 3 different men. If Zion fought Dalton the way he fought Raymond today, it would be a massacre. He had a choice. He could withdraw from the fight, citing a training injury, and slowly fade into the obscurity of a gatekeeper, a tough guy who used to be great until he lost his nerve. Or he could confront the ghost. Zion didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, his decision was made. He didn't need to rebuild his ego. He needed to rebuild his entire understanding of human combat. He needed to learn what real was. The wooden doors of the Oakland dojo felt impossibly heavy. Pushing them open, Zion Callahan stepped out of the blinding California sun and into the quiet sanctuary of canvas and sweat. He wore a simple gray tracksuit, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. All the bravado that had fueled his first visit was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate exhaustion. The gym was largely empty, save for Bruce Lee and his close friend and assistant, James Yimley. They were clustered around a modified heavy bag, filling its core with fine metal dust to create a denser, bone-jarring target. Bruce looked up, the kinetic energy in the room immediately shifting. James instinctively squared his shoulders, recognizing the heavyweight who had crashed their class weeks prior. But Bruce simply raised a hand, his sharp eyes scanning Zion's defeated posture. Zion didn't stride across the floor. He stood near the doorway, pulling a knit cap from his head. "Mr. Callahan," Bruce said, his voice smooth and unreadable. "We are closed for private instruction today." "I know," Zion replied, his gravelly voice remarkably quiet. He swallowed his pride, every last ounce of it. "I'm not here to challenge you, Mr. Lee. I'm here to beg." Bruce tilted his head slightly. "Beg for what?" "You ruined me," Zion stated bluntly. "Not my body, my mechanics. Every time I get in the ring now, I know my power is a lie. If a man weighing 140 can completely dismantle my structure, a man my own size is going to put me in a coma. I fight Dalton Briggs in 5 weeks. He's a killer. If I fight him as a brawler, I lose everything. I need to know how you generated that force from nothing. I need to understand the interception." James scoffed loudly. "You want Bruce to teach you a lifetime of kung fu in 5 weeks so you can win a prize fight?" "I don't need kung fu," Zion countered, holding Bruce's gaze. "I need the physics, the biomechanics, the 1-inch power. I've spent my life being a rock. I need you to teach me how to be heavy water." A slow, genuine smile touched the corners of Bruce's mouth. This was the ultimate validation of his evolving martial philosophy. Combat was universal, unbound by the rigid styles of the East or the West. Here was a world-class athlete asking to integrate Eastern fluidity into Western brutality. 5 weeks is not enough time to learn my way," Bruce said, gesturing to the mat. "But it is exactly enough time to unlearn yours. Take off your shoes, Zion." For the next 35 days, Zion Callahan completely vanished from the boxing circuit. His manager, Mickey Doyle, thought his fighter had suffered a nervous breakdown. He sat on the sidelines in Oakland, chewing unlit cigars, watching in utter bewilderment as Bruce Lee broke a heavyweight contender down to his foundational elements. There was no sparring. Bruce made Zion stand in front of mirrors for hours, dissecting his kinetic chain. "Your power comes from the floor, yes," Bruce explained, tapping Zion's massive thigh with a bamboo reed. "But your energy travels through a rigid pipe. You tense your shoulders before you strike. You telegraph your intent. You are a freight train, powerful, but stuck on a very predictable, easily derailed track." Bruce introduced the concept of non-telegraphic movement, teaching Zion to fire strikes without twitching his shoulders, relying purely on the explosive contraction of his lats. To master the clinch, Bruce brought in Dan Inosanto, a brilliant martial artist with a profound grasp of leverage. "When a larger man leans on you, do not push back," Bruce instructed, physically guiding Zion's hips as Dan applied pressure. "When you push a heavy object, you give it a solid base to rest upon. Yield, let his weight fall into empty space, and as he stumbles, use his momentum to fuel your strike. Be the void, then be the hammer." It was sheer agony. Zion fought against a decade of ingrained muscle memory. But slowly the giant adapted. He learned that absolute relaxation was the true source of blinding speed. He practiced simultaneous defense and attack, stepping inside to deliver body blows in the exact same fraction of a second he parried an incoming strike. Oni, the night of the fight, the Grand Olympic Auditorium in Los Angeles, was a cauldron of cigar smoke and screaming fans. Dalton Briggs paced his corner like a caged rhinoceros. Weighing 224 pounds, Briggs was famous for a left hook that detached retinas. Across the ring, Zion sat perfectly still. The heavy, brooding tension that normally preceded his bouts was entirely absent. His breathing was deep and rhythmic, originating from his diaphragm. "Don't be a rock," he told himself. "Be a heavy wave." The bell rang. Briggs charged, instantly looking to assert physical dominance with a wild, looping hook. Zion didn't brace for impact. Employing Bruce's principle of economy of motion, Zion pivoted his lead foot outward by a mere 2 inches, allowing the hook to whistle past his chin. As Briggs overextended, Zion fired a crisp, non-telegraphic straight right down the pipe. Pop. The intercepted blow caught Briggs squarely on the nose, snapping his head back. Zion didn't follow up with a wild flurry. He slid out of range, returning to a relaxed stance. For 3 rounds, Zion frustrated the monster. Every time Briggs tried to brawl, Zion evaporated. Every time Briggs planted his feet, Zion intercepted him with stiff jabs carrying the kinetic snap of 1-inch punch strikes generated by perfect structural alignment rather than sheer muscle. Infuriated, Briggs rushed out for round 4, abandoning all technique. He absorbed 2 stiff jabs just to close the distance, crashing his massive frame into Zion and driving him hard against the ropes. The crowd roared. Briggs leaned his full weight onto Zion's chest, grabbing the back of his neck with his left glove, loading up a devastating right uppercut to shatter Zion's ribs. "Clinch him, Artie," Mickey screamed from the apron. But Zion didn't push back against the crushing weight. Instead, Zion completely relaxed his shoulders. He dropped his center of gravity precipitously, stepping deeply into Briggs's space. Briggs, relying on Zion's resistance to maintain his own balance, suddenly found himself leaning into thin air. As Briggs stumbled forward, his posture irreparably broken, his uppercut dying before it launched, Zion executed a perfect simultaneous defense and attack. He parried Briggs's trapped arm and unleashed a right hook born entirely from the floor. It traveled a mere 6 inches. It utilized the torque of his hips, the sudden drop in elevation, and the entire mass of his frame perfectly aligned behind his knuckles. It was the heavyweight translation of Oakland's physics. The punch connected with the exposed hinge of Briggs's jaw. The giant's eyes rolled backward, his legs decoupled from his nervous system, and he collapsed face first onto the canvas. The referee immediately waved the fight off. The arena exploded, but Zion Callahan merely stood in the neutral corner, his breathing steady. He looked at his hands, guided by a completely new intelligence. Bruce Lee hadn't just shown him a parlor trick. He had shown him the truth. Power was an illusion without precision, and the greatest weapon a fighter could possess was an empty, adaptable mind. Enjoyed this deep dive into the legendary cross-training of combat sports. Give that like button, share, and don't forget subscribe.